Okay, just before I begin, sort of moving on further, I think what it is really important for me to do,
brilliant.
having introduced this, is just really share with you some of the things that I'm going to talk about today, but also just what I feel today is, and also what
Thank you so much.
so first of all, really just want to say that what I really want to do today is to share with you some of the options that you may want to consider if you're thinking about a green funeral. For some of you, the green funeral may be a top priority. For others, it may be something that you need to consider when you're planning your funeral or a funeral. For still others, it may be something that you've not even considered at all. Or maybe you're here just because you're curious about the topic. I hope whichever of these categories you fall into, there's something here for you to take away with you today, to stimulate further thought and discussion. But I think it's equally important for me to say today what we are not here to do. Firstly, we are not here in any way, shape or form to say that you must have a green funeral or that this is the only kind of funeral that we will offer. Since Full Circle opened in 2016, we have supported countless families for whom this isn't a part of their plan. What is important to them is that we help them to create a service that is that truly reflects the person that has died and what is particularly important to them as a family. Secondly, and this also is really important, we're not here to make people feel guilty about the choices that they make for a funeral or the choices that they can't make, whatever those reasons may be. Our aim really today is to show you some options and encourage thought and conversation around the topic of green funerals. So, moving on. Okay, I just generally want, first of all, just to have a very brief overview of this question, do funerals really matter? And I think, obviously, we would say definitely yes. That's very much our ethos here. Some of you may have already seen the Funeral Experts by Experience webinar. If you haven't, I would maybe direct you to that, which there's a link on Full Circle website for that, and that's definitely well worth a watch. That's the one that Sarah led last time. Funerals matter partly because they help to support, as it says on the screen there, a growing acceptance of loss. They can and do make positive memories for people at a difficult time. Many of you may know that before I did this, I was a Methodist minister for the best part of 17 years. And it was equally important to me then that as a minister, as a celebrant, what I did was to help create something that really enabled the family to have a positive memory and to create something that they wanted. So that's for us is really key, that we create funerals that are positive and help families to take away those positive memories with them. Funeral also, as we know, should reflect the person who's died. And again, Sarah talks about this in the previous webinar. And that can be all sorts of different things. For some, that's a celebration. For some, it's a very somber time. For some, it's a time where there's much laughter. For others, it's a quiet, reflective time. And getting that right is really, really key. So therefore, funerals really do matter to the family of the person who has died. And again, we need to set that tone. We need to get that tone right, both as funeral directors, as celebrants, as anybody involved in the funeral. It's making sure that the family get the tone right so that the funeral service they get is what they want and they can take away with them. And it does lead to much better outcomes in longer term in families dealing with their sense of loss, their bereavement, their grief. If you've created a funeral that helps them to move on, we've found that there are definitely better outcomes for the family. So moving on then to our green element. And realistically, at the moment in this country, you are sort of faced with three committal options, I would say, is realistically where we are here in the UK at the moment. You've got a choice of a natural or woodland burial site, you can have a cemetery or a churchyard, or you've got the choice of cremation. And those are the choices that most families are faced with today. We will hear a little bit more from Sandy about the alternative to these that he is going to share with us. That is his brainchild, it's his creation. So we look forward to hearing Sandy talk about that at the moment. And there were lots of different arguments around which of these may or may not be a more green element. A natural woodland burial site is probably thought to be the best option, but certainly there have been studies undertaken looking at these. And if you want details of those, Sarah, I can pass those on to you about whether or not actually that is correct. Because again, a lot of people would choose a natural burial woodland site because they may want to visit that later on. And so if they're traveling a long distance to get to that, the more visits they make, then perhaps the less green of an option that is. Doesn't mean we shouldn't choose that, but again, it's just something that we would like people to think about when they are looking at what committal options are available. Likewise, the cemetery or churchyard, again, often people would choose that option because it's a place that they want to go to, it's a place of pilgrimage, it's a place that they can go and visit. If it's only a few miles down the road, if it's only a few hundred yards down the road and they can walk, that obviously has less impact on the environment. But again, it may be that families travel a long distance to come to it. And so, again, there are questions around whether the burial is a greener option or not. And obviously, finally, cremation. Again, you've got all the energy that is used, the toxins that may be released during that cremation, and whether that is a good thing or not. But then to counteract that, these studies are saying, but often people then don't go back to the crematorium. Again, you've got less travelling involved. So you can see that even just on the committal options, this begins to open up lots of cans of worms and is not perhaps quite as simple as it may look on the face of it. And so again, what we're asking people to do is just to think about this and to open that line of discussion. Other choices that we may have in our green funeral thing is asking people to plan carefully and in advance. And I want to just leave that one for the time being, because I'm just conscious that I don't want to take up all the time this morning, because I really want us to hear what Sandy has to say. So I'm going to just come back very shortly to planning carefully in advance, because I have a specific slide about that one. Embalming, again, that's not something we would naturally...
Thank you so much, very kind.
We do offer it to families if they want that, but it's not something that would be natural, because again, the chemicals that are used in embalming a body clearly don't sit well with environmental issues. Coffin choices is another really tricky thing, and one again that we're not here to say this is the type of coffin you should choose, but again there are lots of different types of coffin, and some may seem more green than others, but again that's a question that we would need to explore. A lot of people these days are wanting to go for things that are willow or wicker or pandanus or other of these natural substances that are then woven together. And these clearly have less impact on the environment as the natural material, partly because they are able to grow back quicker and they can be harvested naturally. But then a lot of them aren't grown in this country, so you've got to ask the question of the shipping from wherever they come from to here. Does that have any particular advantage they may have? And there are some companies that will just make 3 sizes so that the coffins can be shipped inside each other, be like Russian dolls, which again helps to offset any travel costs.
Andrew?
You've got the issue of the other types of coffins, or the wooden ones, or the ones that are chipboard with wood veneer. They travel there, but is the material that they are made out of not as good for the environment. Likewise, with cardboard coffins or wool coffins, you can see on the image there are shrouds. So again, there are all sorts of issues and questions around this, and on the face of it, it may appear a simple choice, but actually the more you delve into it, the more complicated it gets. And at the moment, as far as we're aware, we've not found any independent survey that really gives us details on which of these is best. There are surveys out there, but none of them that we have found are truly independent or have no connection to coffin makers or suppliers. If you know of one different, Sarah and I would love to know where that is, because we've certainly not managed to find them yet. Likewise, if you choose the cremation route, then urns are another option that we look at as to which are more green, which are better for the environment. Again, the majority of urns come in the same material you can get in coffins, and you can also, as you see, possibly in the right-hand corner of your screen there, these days that will float for a short time. If somebody wants to put their ashes into water, they will then float, and then they will sink, and the ashes will go to the bottom, and they will all dissolve naturally and disappear. So again, choices people have. Moving on to little things. Again, and I briefly touched on this, travelling to the funeral. Clearly, when we are in pre-COVID or hopefully post-COVID times, travel becomes a big issue. Are you travelling to one venue? Are you travelling to 2 or 3 venues? You know, is there lots of people travelling? Is car share you know, a thing you can do? How far are you travelling? As I mentioned, if you're going to a green burial site, very few of us have the luxury of living close to one of those. Some do, but very few of us. So again, is that something that perhaps you need to think about, whether you want to travel that far or whether you want to look for another option somewhere closer? Again, with venues, can you use just one venue? Certainly at Full Circle, we have done a few funerals where the family didn't want a religious service, and therefore, rather than just using the chapel at the local crematoria, they have managed to arrange with us to use a hotel where they can have the service, the celebration, whatever they want to call that, actually in the hotel, in a separate room. Then the coffin is taken away and everybody's already there, and then they move into a different room for the wake afterwards. So again, that saves people having to travel to 2 or 3 places. And you know, are those venues becoming more common? Is that something that people want to look at more these days? Likewise, when I was a minister in the Methodist Church, I found a lot of families had begun to have a funeral in church and then stay there for the wake, and the coffin would travel on its own. So again, it was less travel. So again, things just for people to think about. You know, what are the venues that we can look at? Do we have to stick with traditional ones? Does the ceremony have to be in a different place to the wake? So it's, again, very simple things, but questions that can be looked at and actually can help to offset our carbon footprint, our carbon emissions. Flowers, again, something else. We've just finished a team meeting this morning, and one of my colleagues, Dave, has just told us that they have just come across a florist in Harrogate who now provides flowers that have no plastic in them at all. So they're on a bed of moss and mulch, so that everything is natural, no oasis, no plastic tray. So we're really keen to see how these work for families. Likewise, there are places that will offer flowers that are just grown within their garden, within their farm, and flowers that haven't travelled halfway across the world to get here. So again, something as simple as that can help to reduce our carbon footprint. It may be that the person who has died was a very keen gardener, and it may be that we can just use flowers that come from their garden or from your garden. And whilst that may not look like the traditional flowers people may expect at a funeral, it certainly may have more personal meaning for the person. Not so long ago, we did a funeral where the family, rather than just having flowers, had a vegetable display on the coffin, because the person who had died was a hugely fan of gardening allotments, and that for them was much more important. And again, it was all local produce that they'd grown here. Memorials, again, is something that is worth a conversation. If you're going for a more traditional burial or interment of ashes, the stone that is used for a headstone, has it been grown locally? Has it been imported? Where has it come from? And again, just a conversation that is worth having if that is the sort of thing that you feel is important to you for a funeral. I said I would come back to talking about planning carefully and in advance. This is where I'd like to do that for just a couple of moments. One of the things that we are very keen at here at Full Circle is encouraging people to talk as early as possible about what they may want from their funeral, what is important to them to have in their funeral. And I think some of you will know that we're very happy to go and talk to anybody about this, whether it's people in the caring profession, whether it's healthcare professionals, solicitors, individual families. We are very happy to go and talk to them and explain to them how perhaps they can begin to have these conversations, because certainly it's our belief and understanding that having conversations like this as early as possible is so often easier than having this sort of conversation when you need to have it, either when you've got a diagnosis or when you've got a funeral to plan. Having discussions much earlier is so much easier, and you've got time to think about what you want and have a more open discussion and go away and formulate thoughts. And again, if green issues are important to you, again, that's much more time to have conversations about, well, what are the green issues that we can incorporate into the funeral that we want to plan? And that gives you a much greater timescale in which to do that. And I realise that still here, certainly in England, we some of us have still this Victorian outlook that we don't talk about death, we don't talk about funerals, but we're gently trying to encourage people that if we can do this, then it is a real gift for the family that are left behind, because they know what it is that you would like. And as you see from the slide there, the level of detail is very much down to personal choice. You don't have to have planned it to the nth degree, but actually being able to just come up with 2 or 3 choices of things that are important to you will help the family, but also will allow you, if green is important, to have that discussion about, where the ceremony may be. Can you have it in the same place? Do I want flowers out of my own garden rather than flowers that have been imported from somewhere? How do we travel to different venues? We're very happy to encourage and help people to do that. We have forms that we can give to families and to friends to begin those conversations without any obligation to use our services. There is no fee for this. It's just something that we feel important about, that we want families and healthcare professionals and carers to be able to answer questions and to be able to encourage people to talk about what is important to them for their funeral. And so, very conscious that my time is nearly up, and I want to hand over to Sandy, because I do feel that Sandy has some very good things to share with us to this morning. So this is my final slide for the moment, and it's a question for you as to, it says what can we do, and the we is you, it's not me. And so the 3 things really that I want to challenge you all on, if I can, from this morning. First of all, spread the word that funerals can be meaningful. They don't have to conform to what people have traditionally done. They can, if green is important, have green elements about them. It doesn't have to be fully green, but I hope, as I've shared this morning, there are things that you can include in that will help people to realise that they're being able to offset their carbon footprint. I would encourage you to share your thoughts at your funeral and encourage others to talk. Whether that's looking at a prepaid plan or documenting funeral wishes in any way. And even if you don't feel you can talk to a family, even if you just write something down and put it in a drawer and tell them that's where it is, if you're not the sort of family that can talk openly, then I would encourage you to do that. But also, I would encourage you to say to other people that you know well that, if they would like to talk with us, you're very willing to listen. It doesn't have to come to a professional like us or a solicitor. That a friend, family member, you're very willing to listen and hear what they want to say and write that down for them if you want to. And finally, I would say, but maybe most importantly, have high expectations of us as funeral directors. Sarah has worked very hard to get Full Circle to the position it is, and to, I hope, use us as funeral directors to try and lift this industry. And I really would want to encourage you to have the highest expectations of funeral directors, whether you use Full Circle or anybody else. Expect more from them, because I certainly feel that is possibly the best way to improve the industry. So go with questions, challenge them. Don't just accept an option of one or two. Ask what is available, ask why things aren't available if they're not offered to you. But really do have the highest expectations you can do of the funeral industry, because I really feel that's the best way that we can improve things, and also the way that we can begin to offset the carbon footprint that we create as human beings. I'm going to leave that there for the moment. I'm going to invite Sandy now to talk. Once Sandy has finished, then there will be opportunity for you to verbally ask Sandy questions. If you have more in-depth questions or you'd like more information from him, then again, you can put your details in the chat box. But I say, once Sandy's finished, you're all very welcome to come back on video and unmute yourselves, and we'll see what Sandy has to say. So that's my time done now. Thank you for listening to me. Sandy, I wonder if I could invite you now to come and share with us. I will unshare my screen, and if you could talk to us about water cremation, if you would, please.
Can everyone hear me?
I certainly can, so I'm hoping that others can.
Thumbs up. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me along, Andrew.
Welcome.
To share some thoughts and ideas with the people who have joined us today. Normally I would talk for 20 minutes up to 2 hours, but this morning it's going to be 5 to 10 minutes. So really be an overview, but I'm very willing and available to answer any questions that you have, and I'm sure you will have a few questions. I thought I would just start by mentioning a very salient point, and that is that in 1920, 100 years ago, the global population was around 1.8 billion people on the planet, 1.8 billion. And it took us, as a race, it took us 200,000 years to get to 1.8 billion. In the last 100 years, a pimple of time, we've quadrupled our population globally to over 7.5 billion people. It's incredible, but true. So with that comes consequences. A big consequence of that is, in fact, climate change, mainly driven by CO2 in the atmosphere. Now, interestingly, 12 years ago when I founded the company, the driving force behind my thought process was that alkaline hydrolysis, as the technical term of water cremation is, or as I called it, resumation, was the environmental credentials of it compared to flame cremation. Two things I'll mention is CO2. The carbon footprint of resumation is around 6 times less than your average flame cremation and 7 times less energy. There's lots of other data generated principally by some large environmental accountancy company in the Netherlands on behalf of the Dutch government, which is something I can share with others later on. So what is water cremation, I hear you ask? Normally what I would say is when you bury a body in soil, a large part of the decomposition process is actually alkaline hydrolysis. But unlike us, it's carried out by soil bacteria. But it is a biochemical breakdown process of the soft tissue of the body to leave bones at the end. It's a very slow process, can take months, can take years. What we do is we use alkaline hydrolysis, but we apply it in a different way. We use a small amount of a chemical, an alkali, roughly 5%, and 95% water. And we heat the process up in a chamber to around 150 degrees centigrade. Because it's a chemical decomposition process, at 150 degrees centigrade, it is very rapid indeed. So we achieve what nature achieves in months or years, we achieve it in about 3.5 to 4 hours. What's the resulting material you get to give back to the family? Well, we call it ash, but effectively it's cremated remains It's pure white, and because it's from the bones, and you get about 25 to 30% more put into the urn than you would do from a typical flame cremation. What kind of disappointed me, I have to say, when we did an installation 8 years ago in Minnesota, is that although 80% of the families that previously would have chosen flame cremation, overnight swapped to water cremation, or as they called it, green cremation. The main reason they did it was, okay, partly because of its environmental credentials. But sadly for me, it was, the families just found it more gentle than burning. And that's the reality of it. Human nature is such that we apply a consciousness to a time when we don't have consciousness. So if you're afraid of fire when you're alive, that feeling, that fear is translated into your choice of final disposition as well. At the moment, if you don't have that choice, you don't have that option, then flame cremation tends to be the one that people go for. When you really understand what people's driving force is for disposition choice, is when there is an option and you say water cremation or flame cremation. What's the difference? Well, you get ash back at the end. It's typically the same price. And at the end of the day, it's much more environmentally sustainable. A lot of people have been shown in the States to choose water cremation as a consequence of that option. So that's all I was going to say on the process at the moment. And I would like to accept any questions that you may have on that process.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you for that. If I could maybe invite everybody else to come back, I'm going to stop recording now so we can have any questions.